After 20 years of marriage, he asked for a DNA test. He thought he was ready for the truth, but what he found left him silent forever. It was supposed to be a quiet celebration. Julia had risen early to make his favorite blueberry pancakes, just like she had on every anniversary since they said I do. The kitchen smelled like vanilla and fresh coffee. Sunlight slanting across the countertop. She was humming softly, her robe still tied loosely around her waist, when Tom walked in and dropped the words like a stone on glass. I want to get a DNA test. The spatula slipped from her hand. She turned, thinking she'd misheard, but the look on his face was clear. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't anger. It was colder than that, clinical, distant, the kind of expression a man wears when he's already prepared himself for disappointment. Julia couldn't speak at first. Her mouth opened, then closed. 20 years of marriage, and he was questioning the very foundation of their family. Their son, Ben, was about to graduate from college. Their photo albums were full. Their Christmas cards always arrived early. And yet, here they were, her husband, doubting everything, as if love could be undone with a cotton swab and a lab report. The silence between them stretched longer than it ever had. Not the comfortable quiet of long relationships, but something brittle and cold. Julia felt her chest tighten. She didn't ask why, not yet. Some part of her already knew this wasn't just about biology. It was about a wound Tom had carried for years, one she thought had long since healed. But some cuts, it seems, never stopped bleeding. He didn't even look at the flowers. Julia had picked them out 2 days ago. Sunflowers, his favorite. She remembered how, early in their marriage, he'd told her they reminded him of his mother's garden back in Kentucky. That detail had stuck with her all these years, even when other parts of him grew harder to reach. Now, the bouquets sat on the kitchen island, ignored. Tom poured himself coffee, added just a splash of cream, and leaned against the counter like it was any other Wednesday. Except it wasn't. It was their 20th anniversary, and he'd asked for a DNA test. Julia tried to keep her voice steady. Is there something you want to talk about? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared at his mug, swirling the coffee like he was trying to read it. I need to know, he finally said. Know what? She asked, even though the answer was plain. Tom lifted his gaze slowly, and the look in his eyes made her stomach twist. It wasn't rage or even betrayal. It was doubt, the kind that doesn't explode, it erodes. I've done the math, he said. I remember when you told me you were pregnant. How scared you looked. Julia's throat tightened. Her hands trembled just enough to make the coffee in her own cup ripple. You think Ben's not yours? She whispered. I don't know what to think, he replied. That's the problem. Outside, the morning breeze stirred the trees. Inside, the silence was deafening. She could have screamed. She could have thrown the mug, or walked out, or laughed at the absurdity. But instead, Julia nodded once, slowly, like a woman who had just been handed a sentence and accepted it without appeal. All right, she said. Let's do the test. Tom blinked, surprised by how calmly she agreed. And that reaction, more than anything, seemed to rattle him, because maybe, just maybe, she wasn't surprised at all. Tom couldn't sleep that night. He lay in bed beside Julia, eyes open in the dark, listening to the soft hum of the ceiling fan. She hadn't cried, she hadn't argued, she just said okay, and that calm acceptance kept echoing in his mind louder than any outburst would have. He remembered the night she told him she was pregnant, 21 years ago. A warm summer evening, fireflies blinking just outside their porch screen. Julia had worn that light blue sundress he loved, the one that made her eyes look even greener. But that night, she didn't smile when she sat down beside him. I'm late, she'd said. I think I'm pregnant. Tom had felt his whole world tilt in that youthful, terrifying way. They weren't even trying. But what he remembered now, what had stuck with him for years, was how frightened she looked. Not excited, not joyful, just scared. He told himself back then it was nerves, but the feeling never fully left. And later, when Ben was born, there were fleeting moments, a glance, a mannerism, that made something in Tom's gut twist, things that didn't quite add up. He hated himself for doubting. But the questions had never stopped whispering. Over the years, he buried it. Focused on being a good father. Coached Ben's soccer team, taught him how to change a tire, showed up for every parent-teacher meeting. Still, that flicker of uncertainty had stayed in the shadows. aging with him like a quiet ghost dot until now. The day after the conversation, Tom drove alone to a nearby clinic. The receptionist asked no questions when he requested a paternity kit. She slid the box across the counter with sterile indifference. Tom held it in his hands like it was a bomb, sealed, small, and capable of ruining everything. But when he got back home and set it on the kitchen table, he hesitated, because what if the results didn't just reveal a lie? What if they revealed something much worse? There was a time when Sundays were sacred in their house. Julia would make French toast, Tom would read the newspaper in his favorite chair, and Ben would be sprawled on the rug with his Lego sets. The air used to feel full, not with words, but with comfort, with certainty. But over the years, something changed. It was subtle at first. Tom started waking up earlier, spending more time in the garage, tinkering with things that didn't need fixing. Then he stopped joining her for breakfast altogether. Julia would cook anyway, just in case. The table always had a spot for him. He rarely filled it. Looking back, she wondered when the silence had become normal, not peaceful, but empty, a slow erosion of their connection, like waves wearing down the edges of a stone. They still kissed goodbye, still watched TV in the evenings, still remembered anniversaries, but intimacy, trust, those had begun to fade years before Tom ever said the word DNA. Julia tried to trace it back. Was it after Ben left for college? Or before that? Maybe when her mother passed away, and Tom hadn't known what to say. She couldn't remember the last time he really looked at her, the way he used to when they danced barefoot in the living room, tipsy on cheap wine and promises. She opened the pantry and saw the test kit sitting beside the cereal, still unopened, still radiating tension. Julia pressed her palm against her chest. Her heartbeat felt uneven, not out of fear but out of exhaustion. 2 decades of building a life, and now she was being asked to prove it was real. She picked up her phone. Her finger hovered over the name she hadn't dialed in years, Aaron Harper, a name Tom didn't even know. With one deep breath, Julia pressed call. The swab felt colder than she expected. Julia sat at the edge of the bathroom sink, the mirror foggy from her morning shower, holding the sterile cotton applicator like it was a piece of glass. Her hands were steady, but her stomach churned. She followed the instructions word for word, gently scraping the inside of her cheek, sealing the sample, labeling it. No part of it felt real. Tom wasn't home when she did it. He'd left early for work. No note, no goodbye kiss, just the sound of the garage door rolling open and shutting closed. She didn't mind. She preferred doing it alone. If she had to face this indignity, she'd do it on her own terms. After sealing the envelope, she placed it back in the kit box and slid it onto the hall table. It looked so small, sitting there, insignificant, and yet it felt heavier than anything else in the house. That afternoon, Julia drove to the post office. No makeup, hair barely brushed. She waited in line behind a young mother, bouncing a fussy toddler, watching them with a strange sense of nostalgia. That used to be her, that used to be them. When it was her turn, she handed the package over to the clerk with a tight smile. No return address required. Just a number, a barcode, and the weight of 2 decades. Driving home, she didn't turn on the radio. The silence was louder than music. That night, Tom didn't ask if she mailed it. He didn't have to. She could tell by the way he looked at her, not with anger, but with caution, like someone walking across thin ice. They barely spoke over dinner. Ben called, but neither of them picked up. Julia watched the call go to voicemail, her thumb hovering above the screen as his name vanished. She wanted to scream, to demand why now, after all these years. But she didn't, because the truth was, deep down, Julia had always feared this day would come. And now that it had, she wasn't sure which scared her more, that Tom might find out the truth, or that she might have to tell it herself. The box was old, tucked behind winter blankets in the upstairs closet, the kind of place you only reach for when seasons change. Julia hadn't opened it in years. She didn't even remember what drove her there now. Maybe it was restlessness, maybe it was fear, or maybe it was the quiet knock on her memory when she saw Aaron Harper's name light up her phone the night before and didn't answer. She pulled the cardboard lid free, releasing a faint scent of cedar and dust. Inside were things she hadn't meant to forget: photos from college, a dried corsage from her wedding, and a stack of cream-colored envelopes bound by a faded blue ribbon. The letters. She sat on the carpet, legs crossed, and untied the ribbon slowly, as if unwrapping a wound that never healed right. Each envelope was addressed to Tom. None had ever been sent. They were dated from the first year of their marriage, the hard year, the quiet year, the quiet year, the one when they nearly split and no one ever knew. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, but the voice inside the pages felt like someone else, someone younger, more afraid, but also more honest. One letter started with, "I don't know how to tell you this without losing you," and her eyes welled before she reached the end. Another simply said, "There's more to that summer than I ever told you. I wanted to forget, but I can't." Julia sat still, the letters scattered like fallen leaves around her. Her heart pounded against her ribs, fast and uneven. She had written them during the days after Ben's birth, long before the DNA test, before the doubts, before everything calcified into silence, and buried under the last letter was something she'd completely forgotten, a single photograph, a Polaroid, creased at the edges. It showed her standing beside Aaron Harper, and a man with a crooked smile and familiar eyes, Ben's eyes. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Tom spotted it before Julia did. A slim, beige rectangle slipped between utility bills and grocery coupons. He stood by the mailbox a long time, just holding it, his name, printed in cold, black ink. No warmth, no mercy. Hid. Didn't bring it inside right away. Instead, he sat in the car, the envelope resting on his lap, watching the house from the driveway like it belonged to someone else. 20 years of birthdays, school recitals, scraped knees, and bedtime stories, all of it balanced on a single sheet of paper sealed inside. When he finally opened it, he did it alone, not because Julia asked him to, but because some part of him couldn't bear her watching his face as the world tilted. His hands trembled as he unfolded the results. Probability of paternity, 0%. Tom's breath caught in his chest. He read it again and again, but the numbers never changed. The words never softened. Ben wasn't his son, not biologically, not by blood, not in the way science demanded. For a few minutes, everything blurred. The living room dimmed, his thoughts scattered. Memories surged like floodwaters. Ben's first steps, the way he held Tom's hand when crossing the street, how he'd whispered, "Thanks, Dad," before leaving for college. It all still felt real, and yet on that page, it WASN single quotes, Teef Tom didn't cry. He didn't shout. He just sat there, the silence thickening around him. Then he noticed something. There was a second page, and what was written there would unravel far more than he ever expected. Tom didn't breathe as he turned to the second page. He expected more data, maybe a confirmation, maybe some sterile scientific language, but what he saw was a short note from the lab technician, attached because of an irregularity in the test file. Donor match flagged, subject listed in regional birth registry as having signed paternity affidavit at time of child's birth. Legal paternity acknowledged. Tom blinked, reading the line twice, then again. It didn't make sense at first, but the words sank in slowly, like fog lifting over familiar ground. He had signed Ben's birth certificate. Of course he had. He was there. He remembered holding the pen, the way Julia looked at him when he did it. There was no hesitation then, only joy. The world was different back then. So were they. Whatever the biology said, the law still saw him as Ben's father. But, more than that, Ben still saw him that way, always had. Nothing in the boy's eyes ever hinted at another truth. To Ben, he was Dad, period. Tom sat on the couch, the envelope limp in his hand, the edges crumpled now. The weight of the paper hadn't changed, but everything else had. It wasn't just about a test anymore. It was about what Julia hadn't said, what she'd carried for 21 years in silence. He wasn't angry, not yet. He was hollow, like a man looking at a house that had stood firm for decades, only to find one of its beams cracked in the foundation. The structure hadn't fallen, but something was off, something that demanded to be uncovered. Tom stood and walked upstairs. The house was quiet. Julia wasn't in their bedroom. He checked the guest room. There, on the bed, was a box, open, letters scattered, and the Polaroid. Tom picked it up, and when he saw the face beside Julia, the one that looked so much like Ben, his breath left his body. She found him sitting on the edge of their bed, the Polaroid in his hand, the box of letters open like a wound. Julia didn't flinch. She closed the door gently behind her and leaned against it, arms crossed tightly across her chest, not defensive, just bracing herself. Tom didn't look at her right away. His name was Ryan, he said, voice low. He has Ben's eyes. Julia nodded. Yes, he does. He finally looked up. Was it an affair? No, she said quietly. It was complicated. She sat down on the other side of the bed, leaving space between them, her fingers twisted around the hem of her sleeve. It happened during that summer we broke up, before we got married. I never told you, not because I wanted to lie, but because I didn't think it would matter. I truly believed Ben was yours. Tom's jaw tightened. But you didn't know. I didn't, she admitted, and by the time I suspected, it was too late. You had already fallen in love with him. We were happy. I couldn't bring myself to rip that away. I thought maybe it would never come up. She paused, swallowing the knot rising in her throat. Ryan didn't want anything to do with the baby. I told him, and he left. Just vanished. I never heard from him again. You were the one who stayed. You were the one who held my hand in the delivery room, who taught Ben how to ride a bike. You chose to be his father. Every single day. Tom stared at the photo again. So I was just the backup plan. Julia's voice cracked. No, you were always the center of it. Even when I was scared, even when I was unsure, you were the one I wanted to build a life with. The silence hung like a fog between them. Then, almost inaudibly, Tom said, You should have told me. I know, she whispered. I was afraid the truth would destroy everything. He looked up, his eyes tired. And now, Julia's response came without hesitation. Now, I'm ready to face it. All of it. Even if it means losing everything. Tom stood. He didn't speak. He didn't reach for her. He just walked past her, opened the bedroom door, and left the room. For 2 days. Tom barely spoke. He went to work, came home, ate quietly. He didn't sleep in their bed. Julia didn't press. She let him sit with it, with the photo, the papers, the memories that now had new shadows. On the third night, he came home later than usual. Julia was on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. Reruns playing low on the TV. She didn't expect him to say anything, but he sat down beside her, his hands empty, his shoulders heavy. I keep looking at that test, he said, and I keep asking myself what I'm supposed to feel. Julia turned, her expression soft but guarded. And what do you feel? Tom stared at the screen for a long time before answering. Betrayed, sad, angry, but also confused. Because even knowing he's not mine by blood, I don't feel different about him. Not really. A tear slid down Julia's cheek. She didn't wipe it away. I think I've always known there were things we didn't say to each other, Tom continued. But I never thought they could crack us open like this. She reached for his hand, slow and tentative. He let her. I was afraid if I told you the truth, she said, you'd stop loving him, stop loving me. Tom shook his head. I didn't love Ben because he looked like me. I loved him because I chose to. Every single day. His voice wavered. And I loved you, even when I didn't know how to say it. Even when things got quiet. Even now. Julia leaned her head against his shoulder. Their hands still linked. I don't know what happens next, she whispered. Me neither, Tom said. But I do know this: what we built. It was real. It still is. The credits on the TV rolled. Outside, a late spring rain began to fall. And inside, for the first time in weeks, the silence wasn't cold. It was full of pain, of truth, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something healing.
If you've made it this far, it means this story touched you in some way. So don't leave without subscribing. It really helps the channel and keeps me motivated to share more stories like this. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And which part of this story moved you the most?